My work is generally site-based. I make large, I call them wallscapes, kind of installations, using silhouettes made out of brown paper. And I am doing that here, but for the first time I'm trying something slightly new, and I've decided to work on the wall first with ink, with black ink and brown ink, and to create a kind of imaginary place, landscape perhaps. And it's completely new. Actually, I have never done this before, ever. But I was kind of inspired by Masereel's work because of his use of black, his kind of graphic approach to his work. And because I'm privileged enough to have a Masereel right opposite my work, I felt like I wanted to have a kind of conversation, for our work to have a conversation. My work is also quite graphic in what it looks like in relation to, I don't mean graphic as in, what do I mean? I mean graphic in terms of design, you know, the sharp edge. I cut out my silhouette figures with a knife. It's very sharp. It's usually stark brown and white. In this case, it's going to be brown and black and white. So when I first started going to art school years ago, I thought I wanted to be a graphic designer. I was absolutely determined. I really thought, yes, graphic design. And then I started my pre-degree course, which in England is called a foundation course. And I hated graphic design, I hated it. Scroll forward though, 30 years later, and my work is quite graphic in nature, so there's a strong design kind of element to the work. But I'm kind of going along, seeing what happens. I've literally just started late yesterday to paint on the wall. It reminds me of years ago. I used to be a painter when I decided not to do graphics. I ended up doing painting instead in art school, and I used to paint imaginary landscapes, and they never had any people in them, but they always had strange objects in that would kind of relate to people in a way. And a friend of mine just messaged me and said, "How's it going?" And I sent her a picture and I said, "I'm having fun, I'm painting again." But I couldn't possibly just leave this. To me, this is really just a backdrop to the figures, which are going to come hopefully tomorrow. I spent a few weeks in my studio in London projecting images onto brown paper, cutting it out, and then I kind of sent it over here. And for me to be here to install the work, it's very much about, I'm still in the process of making the work. So it's difficult for me to send the work and for somebody else to install it for me. Because right here, as we stand, I'm still making decisions. I hardly ever do preparatory drawings. I did a few studies just because Ilse wanted something for the catalogue. But normally, because my work is always site-based, I never have things in the catalogue. So I'm still working, I'm still deciding, I'm still making decisions. And I can't tell you what it's going to look like by the opening on Saturday. I have no idea, but I have probably something like maybe 250 figures to attach to the wall with glue. And then once I finish painting today, I'll decide. I have certain figures that I really want to feature, such as Donald Trump. But I'm still deciding if I'm going to use Donald Trump. But my work is I wouldn't say it's ever overtly political, but I think that I can't, being an artist of colour in this kind of, well, any time, but obviously this is my time, I just feel as though my work needs to reflect the world that I live in. And often the personal becomes political. As a child, I was born in Nigeria, and I emigrated with my family to London as a 6-year-old. So I spent all that time just negotiating what it means to be from somewhere else, growing up in Europe. And that's kind of what my work is about. My work is about where you belong, who you are, who people think they are, what links somebody might have to their kind of former country, maybe in terms of culture, in terms of food. You know, my mum kind of tried to keep that all going for us growing up in London, but we've kind of grown up as Londoners. You know, me and my sisters, we're very British, we're very English. When we go back to Nigeria, we don't quite fit in there. I haven't actually been back for 25 years, but, you know, they know there we're other, and in Europe we're also other. So you're negotiating this liminal space between two continents and trying to work out where you fit in. I spent quite a lot of time on this side of the channel. I went to art school in Amsterdam in the early 90s. I was at the Rijks Academy, and then I stayed on for another 2 years. So I lived there for 4 years altogether. And it was an interesting time for me, partly because having grown up in London all that time, it took me going to another European country and to experience some kind of institutional racism there made me realise what my life was like in London, in the UK. And that's when my work kind of matured and came into its own when I was at the Rijks Academy in the early 90s in Amsterdam. That's when I couldn't carry on making these kind of imaginary landscapes. So that's when I started to look at the human form. It always used to be very pictographic. By that I mean the visual images that we all know and understand, the signs that we see in airports and stations telling you where the bathroom is or where the ticket office is. Those little pictures of men and women is the way that I started to work with the symmetry. And gradually over the years, my figures have become much more lifelike in a way and realistic, I suppose. But for me, they are always signs. They're silhouettes. And they're always naked. I don't want to get kind of sidetracked into, you know, clothing and all this kind of stuff, because that sort of thing will date an image. So for me, they're always naked, they're kind of blanks, they're kind of stand-ins, so I still see them as signs. They're ciphers, like hieroglyphs. They represent bodies of people. My figures are nearly always African figures, and so you might say, how do you know if they're silhouettes? How can you tell? So in a way, there's not a lot of scope to determine. You know, I don't get into drawing faces and people, but just in the small ways that I can do, such as hair texture or hairstyles on the female figures, and even on the male figures you can tell. And the reason I kind of do that is just to, growing up in the UK and going to art school, I never really saw representations of black people in art. You know, I've had a very Eurocentric Western art education, not just art education, education in general. And I think that when I matured as an artist, I wanted to show black people, African people in my work, just as in one way, just as my regular kind of vocabulary, but in other ways, depending on the work that or the exhibition that I'm doing, or the themes that I'm thinking about, a lot of historical events have influenced me and influenced my practice. So one of the things I'm interested in is British imperialism and colonialism. And I don't think you can think about European colonialism without thinking about the slave trade. And that's something that's fascinated me for years. I'm not sure why. I think maybe because for me, I see it as an ultimate, or maybe the first African Holocaust, if you want to call it that. So I was always interested, and that kind of grand, forced migration from one part of the world to the other really fascinated me. Having said that, I've always been interested in this is going to sound very grand, I don't mean it to sound grand, but in man's inhumanity to man. When I was 11, I got Albert Speer's autobiography, Hitler's Architect, his autobiography, out of my local library and read it. I was just interested in understanding how groups of people behave towards other groups of people and why. So when I was 21, I got a travel grant from my college, my art school, and I went to Germany and I went to Dachau to visit the concentration camp. I was just wanted to see this place for myself. And I kind of carried, if I hadn't studied art at college, I would have studied history. So I see my art practice as a way of getting my interest in history kind of into my practice, into my work. So historical research is really important to me in my practice. Since in the last few years, for instance, because of my interest in the transatlantic slave trade, I got a grant 10 years ago and I visited the sites of the slave trade. So I went to Ghana and I visited the castles and the forts along the coast there where the British captured and enslaved people. Then I went to the United States and I visited a few plantations in the south of the United States, in Georgia and South Carolina. And these plantation houses are amazing. They're beautiful houses. You know, they're historic buildings. They're like, in England we have these kind of, what are they called? Kind of country homes that people can visit, like the National Trust. They look like that. They're beautiful. But somewhere in the grounds, at the back somewhere, you will see the slave graveyard or the cabins or something, the remnants of what had happened, what had gone on there 200, 300, 400 years ago. And then as part of that project in the UK, I also visited Liverpool and Bristol, which are the two big slave trading cities in the UK. And my work, I consider what I do to be conciliatory. I want people to, I'm not trying to offend people, but I just think it's important for people to understand why certain aspects of our world are how they are now. And if I think now, what's happening currently in Europe, in England with Brexit, in the UK with Trump, and all this anti-immigration talk, I just think to myself, people need to understand and realise that the history has an effect on our current climate, and you know, people like me, my family, and millions of other families who, for whatever reason, emigrate from, say, the African continent or the subcontinent of India or Asia to Europe, that there is a paper trail for that. There is a reason that happens. And it's difficult to just say, we don't want any more immigrants in our country. I mean, England is a country that's been built on immigration, you know, since Roman times, since before the Roman times. So the argument is really spurious. So I'm hoping in a couple of days you'll be able to see something that is a little bit more developed and will hopefully make more sense. Because at the moment, even to me, this doesn't make a lot of sense. It's really me just having fun with some sponges and some sprays and some rollers. But I'm hoping to make it come together. And this piece is called Tableau Vivant. And so I'm just hoping to make little narratives across the 16 meters of the piece, little narratives and little connections between groups of people. Nothing specific, there's no specific narrative, no one narrative that is going on, but just lots of little kind of tableaus across the wall.